Derek, I want to see you moving.
Everyone knows the story of the Titanic, but most of us learned about it through the iconic 1997 film. I too discovered it in that way, and the movie captivated me. I was just a 7-year-old child back then, and the story of the Titanic left such an impact on me that my father took me to the late-night premiere on the day it was released. I remember the theater was packed. There was only one seat left, and I watched that 3.5-hour-long film in my father's lap. It was astonishing to me how a supposedly unsinkable ship sank on its maiden voyage, claiming the lives of 1,123 people. I even had a notebook where I collected newspaper and magazine articles and photos about the Titanic. I was so affected by the event. Setting aside all the absurd aspects, the film is truly great. I have no complaints about it. But now, as I think back, there's usually one overlooked thing. The Titanic is not just a love story between Jack and Rose. On a ship with thousands of people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, you can find or write stories reflecting all kinds of emotions: love, passion, anger, and more. But the Titanic is not just a love story. It's a tale of managerial error, a natural disaster, and an engineering failure. When we move beyond the love story of the poor boy and the rich girl and start scientifically questioning how this magnificent engineering marvel of its time could fail so catastrophically, we see that a fascinating scientific story emerges in light of the data gathered over the past 110 years. I believe it's time to tell the real story of the Titanic. This is the scientific tale of the Titanic. All of Evolution Tree's work is made possible by our Chief Executive Officer and YouTube supporters. If you're learning something new from Evolution Tree, you can contribute to our strength by using the links in the pinned forum. The Titanic, built in 1920, was not only the largest passenger ship ever built up to that time. It also held the record for the largest ship ever built in any class in history, with its 882 feet, 269.1 meters, length, 46,128 gross tons mass, and 3,147 passenger capacity, making it the largest ship of its era. However, there was also its lesser-known twin, the Olympic, built before it, and it did not sink. In fact, the Olympic gave its name to the class of ships it belonged to. It was a ship of the Olympic type, and besides itself and the Titanic, there was also the Britannic in this class. The Titanic, while serving as a hospital ship during the First World War in 1916, collided with a German submarine in the Aegean Sea off the coast of Merthyr Island, sinking within 55 minutes. The Titanic even holds the title of being the largest ship sunk during the First World War. However, the warmer waters of the Aegean, the presence of many more lifeboats, and the rapid arrival of aid meant that 136 out of its 1,066 passengers were saved. This ship, worth $23.5 million in today's money, now lies in the beautiful waters of the Aegean. As you can see, the Titanic's twin, the Olympic, is the only ship among the transatlantic passenger ships in this class that did not sink. Perhaps because it did not share the same ill-fated destiny, it was not as popular as them. But today, our topic is not the Titanic or the Olympic. The moment of the Titanic's demise was determined from the day it was born. The iceberg that would ultimately cause the Titanic to sink was born almost simultaneously with the Titanic itself, about 1,150 miles west of the Irish city of Belfast, where the ship was built off the coast of Greenland. However, this iceberg, which broke off from the glaciers on land, had accumulated over millions of years from the accumulation of snowfall dating back to 100,000 years ago. But these extraordinary numbers are quite ordinary for icebergs. In other words, this iceberg had nothing special about it. It was just one of about 40,000 icebergs formed each year. Interestingly, these icebergs, which continue to form today, do not immediately move towards the more heavily trafficked southern hemispheres. Due to ocean currents, they first progress northward along the Labrador Current between Greenland and Canada's Finn Gulf. Then they turn westward and then southward, descending into the Atlantic Ocean. Most of these icebergs get stuck in the shallow waters along the Gulf coasts. Therefore, hardly any of them reached the Atlantic Ocean. However, in the year Titanic embarked on its maiden voyage, an extraordinary event was about to occur. I'll come to that. But three critical errors that would lead to the Titanic disaster were made during the production process. The first of these occurred about 2 years before the ship went into production, at a meeting between the ship's chief designer, Alexander, and its investor and owner, Brooks I.J. As portrayed in the movie, wanted those famous grand staircases to be as magnificent as possible. Therefore, the structural integrity of the ship was pushed to its limits, and the bulkheads dividing the ship's different levels were built lower to make room for more expansive staircases. These compartments, designed to trap water to prevent a ship from sinking or make it much harder to sink when damaged, are ideally supposed to be as high above the water level as possible. However, due to design decisions like the Grand Staircase, these compartments were built only 3 meters above the water surface. This error would cause the ship to take on water much faster than it should have. Another error was made in the deck design. The Titanic had the capacity to carry 64 lifeboats. Each of these, although it would be quite uncomfortable if fully loaded, could carry approximately 65-70 people. In most cases, the lifeboats were so packed that they could accommodate up to 65-70 people, but if necessary, it was possible to transport 4,500 people with the lifeboats. As you can see, this was well above the ship's capacity of 3,047 passengers. However, when Bruce Alexander examined the models, he concluded that having 64 lifeboats, initially planned to be 48, would create a crowded and unsightly appearance on the deck due to the presence of seals, and he requested the number of lifeboats to be reduced to 16. Therefore, with the addition of 4 collapsible boats, the lifeboat capacity was reduced to only 178 people. This meant that only 53% of the passengers were carried when the Titanic sank, with 2,220 on board. The third mistake was made during the construction of the ship. In the early days of shipbuilding in 1912, when steel usage was just beginning to emerge, ships were previously built of iron. However, iron is a much softer material compared to steel and can be easily broken. Material scientists found that adding carbon atoms to iron, even at a rate of only 1 or 2%, created an alloy much stronger than iron. Thus, the material we call steel was born. However, the strong nature of steel also made it difficult to use as a construction material. For example, we use rivets, which are mushroom-shaped fasteners, to connect large plates together. The tail of this rivet is passed through holes in the metals to be joined, and it is seated in the hole up to the head. Then, it is fixed from the head side, and tremendous pressure is applied to the tail, causing it to swell to 1.5 times its diameter under this pressure. Thus, those metal parts are riveted together. Once a rivet is placed, it's not an easily removable element. Often, it requires breaking apart the plates that are being joined. Therefore, rivets are classified as permanent fasteners. Of course, this permanence wouldn't pose any obstacle for a massive iceberg. However, the production error I mentioned was this. At that time, the common riveting machines in use were designed for iron rivets. Machines for steel rivets had also begun to be produced, but they couldn't be found as small as those used today. Nevertheless, it was still possible to use steel rivets in many parts of the Titanic's hull. However, at the bow, as the parts curved towards the sides, making it impossible to insert steel rivets into the front sections of the ship and place them in their positions due to the curvature. Iron rivets were used instead of steel ones. These iron rivets, being much softer and weaker, could be shattered even with a 5mm shift. It was difficult, and it would cause the iceberg to open the ship's hull like a zipper. This series of mistakes could actually have been prevented with a single decision. To allow commercial ships to sail, permission had to be obtained from the British Chamber of Commerce. They could refuse to grant travel permission to the ship by stating that the lifeboat capacity was significantly below the number of passengers. However, at that time, the minimum lifeboat capacity was determined not in relation to the passenger capacity, but by a fixed number, which was 1,000 at that time. Therefore, it was concluded that the Titanic had a sufficient lifeboat capacity, and the ship was granted permission to sail. Just about a month before the Titanic set sail, a series of other unfortunate events occurred. The captain of the ship, who was John Smith, the most experienced captain of the White Star Line, the manufacturer of the Titanic, was so well liked for his pleasant demeanor and captaincy that millionaires such as Vanderbilt, Guggenheim, or J.P. Morgan were changing their tickets just to sail on ships commanded by Smith. It's a twist of fate that Smith, who had earned the title of captain among millionaires, was about to retire after completing the Titanic voyage. In fact, the Titanic was supposed to set sail in March 1912. However, while preparations were underway, news arrived that its twin, the Olympic, another British ship, collided with the SS Hawke, sustaining severe damage. As a result, the ship was urgently docked for repairs, and the work on it pushed the Titanic's journey back by a month. This delay required changes in the crew that Captain Smith could work with. For example, instead of Third Officer David, the Olympic's Third Officer Henry was brought in. You may wonder why I am narrating so many details. Well, when David, who was relieved of duty, hastily packed his belongings, he accidentally took the key to the room where the lookouts, also known as crow's nest or crow's nests, which are the forward upper platforms in a ship, kept their belongings. As a result, an adequate number of binoculars could not be provided to the lookouts stationed at the top of the ship. Actually, there were enough binoculars on the bridge, but no one bothered to carry binoculars up to the crow's nests. These mistakes would result in the iceberg being spotted much later. Under all these circumstances, the Titanic set sail on April 10, 1912, from the port of Southampton in England towards the city of New York in America, unaware that it was embarking on its final journey. Of course, if those binoculars had been there, would things have turned out differently? It's hard to say.